All right, guys, we've got big Nintendo Switch 2 news when it comes to what is happening in Japan and what could happen in 2026 overall, and the big Nintendo Direct that's supposedly happening in February. We've got a bit more information on that, on what we could potentially see overall. But before we get into all of that, please make sure you hit that subscribe button because we are giving away a Nintendo Switch 2 at 150,000 subscribers, and we're giving away a $50 eShop card by the end of this month. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below, hit that like button, notification bell, and look out because we're going to be having new giveaways pretty much every single month. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right back into this, guys, because we have to discuss what's going on in Japan. The Nintendo Switch 2 is helping to fuel and pump new blood and life into the Japanese gaming market. We have reports of nearly 40% growth in 2025 overall, and for the 21st consecutive year, the majority of Japan's best-selling titles were on Nintendo platforms. So Switch 2 was able to move 3.78 million units VGC rights in 2025, making it Japan's fastest selling console ever and accounting for more than half of all home consoles sold that year. According to the annual sales data published by Famitsu, for the 21st consecutive year, Nintendo games dominated the best selling physical games chart, with Switch and Switch 2 games taking 9 of the top 10 places and likely 18 of the top 20. Switch 2's Mario Kart World sold a huge 2.66 million physical copies, making it the annual best-selling console game in Japan since Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and Splatoon 3, which were released in 2022. Last year's best-selling game in Japan was Mario Party Jamboree with 954,261 units. As a result, Japan's domestic games market is established to have grown from 301.32 billion yen in 2024 to 418.13 billion yen in 2025. The majority of this growth comes from the hardware sales, which rose from 189.4 billion yen to 282.6 billion yen. Now, Japan's best-selling console hardware last year was the Nintendo Switch 2, once again 3.78 million, followed by the Nintendo Switch 1 with 1.5 million, the PlayStation 5 with 879,000 units plus, the Xbox Series S and X with 31,000 units plus, and the PlayStation 4 with 1,000 units plus. Now, this does mean that Nintendo has the best-selling game hardware in Japan in all but 1 year, when the PSP was the leading platform for the past 2 decades across the Nintendo DS, Nintendo 3DS, Nintendo Switch, and now the Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo's closest competitor in Japan, PlayStation 5, has seen its sales decline for 2 consecutive years. In 2025, PS5 sales were down 60% despite the launch of a new, cheaper model. And that's interesting, not because their sales are declining. I kind of already saw that. We've already reported on that. It's just one thing that's happening in Japan, and Sony has a massive base when it comes to outside of Japan, so I'm not dooming and glooming, but it's something that easily people could have taken that and put AI slop thumbnails and the sad Kratos face or sad Astrobot face and make videos, but nobody did that at all, regionally speaking, when it comes to this. Interesting when it comes down to that, because you know, if it was Nintendo, you know that would have been a thing with Pokemon sad or Mario evil or sad or stuff like that. So interesting nonetheless. And I think that it also proves another thing that I've seen people say when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2, that the only reason why it's doing well in Japan is because of the price. And it's like, no, it's not just the price. That's a factor overall, because they do have a cheaper Japanese language model, but you also need the games and you need the system gimmick that's going to get people excited in that region. That's also a huge part of it, because Sony also released a cheaper Japanese language only model PlayStation 5, and it had trouble outselling the Nintendo Switch 1 overall. So that's just something to think about, as well as some people have stated that in videos and talk that I've seen overall. Now, the PlayStation 5 sold 1.4 million units in 2024, which was down significantly compared to the 2.6 million sold in 2023. When the availability of consoles was boosted following the COVID-related supply issues, Sony raised the price of the PS5 in Japan by 20% last year. So here's a snapshot of the best-selling games, the top 1 through 10, and then not from Famitsu, but game data libraries 11 through 20. Also have to factor in here, guys, that this does not include digital sales, so also just keep that in mind. There's no digital sales here, but yeah, this is a huge boost to the industry overall when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2. And this is something that I predicted would happen with the Nintendo Switch 2 in Japan because of what happened with the Nintendo Switch 1. Switch 1 was also so dominant in Japan with a lot of the best-selling games being on that hardware. Also, Nintendo's first-party games helped move the platform, so I think that it was going to snowball into the Nintendo Switch 2, and that's exactly what's happening here with this. Nintendo has a really strong vice grip on the Japanese game market at this point, and I do see it actually becoming bigger in 2026. I do think that based off of Nintendo potentially having more stock and the games that are coming out at the end of the year, I do think that games like the new Generation 10 Pokemon, which we're going to talk about in just a bit, in addition to potentially a new 3D Mario and some of the other announcements, as long as Nintendo has stock, they can actually push that number to an even higher amount for next year. And then also another thing is that I think that it's going to be default just bigger when it comes to the number overall, because the Nintendo Switch 2 launched in the middle of the year last year worldwide. Now they're going to have a full 12 months overall, so just by default it's going to be a bigger number than that 3.7 million that they sold last year in Japan, which was still really good when it comes to a system. Obviously the launch, so you're going to have excitement and hype to a system that's been on the market for Japan's best-selling system of all time, which is the Nintendo Switch 1. You got the follow-up, of course, that's going to be hype, but they've been able to sustain the momentum and keep the hype going, and even into the new year as well. We got the sales numbers from the end of last year in Japan to earlier this year. They're selling 150,000 units plus per a week in Japan. So if they can keep up that pace, along with putting out the new games, along with actually having some hype with the Nintendo Directs, I think it's going to continue to get better and better overall in Japan. So interesting numbers and results there. So what do you guys think overall? You can let me know in the comment section below. But now we are going to move on to some Nintendo Direct speculation / talk. Shout outs to Nintendo Talk over on Twitter. He apparently heard some information about this upcoming rumored February Nintendo Direct, and he stated that expect a Nintendo Direct in February with some anniversary announcements in the show. So some of the notable anniversaries are The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, and more. So there's a lot of different anniversaries that they could go over, and he says Mario, but Mario kind of already had its like anniversary and all that, so we'll see. I do think that a 3D Mario game could be announced. I'm not sure if that's going to be anniversary related, but yeah, a new 3D Mario, that could happen. I do think that something for Zelda is definitely possible. I've discussed Zelda on this show recently so much to where the next Zelda game isn't going to be ready probably for the next year, 2 years or something like that. Nintendo could announce the next Legend of Zelda game. That could be something to where they announce it early. They've done this so many times before. People forget that usually Nintendo doesn't announce games like super early ahead of time, but sometimes they do. And if they do announce a game early ahead of time, it's usually The Legend of Zelda. They've done this now for generations at this point, teasing or announcing or showing something with the next Legend of Zelda game, and sometimes it takes years for it to come out. Sometimes those plans are railroaded by a new platform, like with Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, like with Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Like, it's happened a number of times. And even to a degree, Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, they showed that game so early with that picture of Miyamoto, and then it came out all the way at the end of the generation for the Nintendo Wii. So I don't think it's going to take that long. I do think, though, it could be something to where they say, we're going to have this new Legend of Zelda game, like a teaser or something like that. And I do think that they're going to try to, I would say, make the scope of the land or the size of the next Legend of Zelda smaller to contain the game a bit and make it in a timely fashion. I think that one thing that Nintendo can afford is to take 6 years plus or so to make a Legend of Zelda game like they did with Tears of the Kingdom, which I do think that some of those issues came from the physics engine. Some of those issues came from the Nintendo Switch 1 system just not having enough overhead sometimes to handle everything, because we saw how the Nintendo Switch 2 handled Tears of the Kingdom like a dream in 60 FPS with incredibly nice resolution, whereas the Nintendo Switch 1 version, definitely some dynamic stuff here and there, some hitching, some frame rate problems. So I do think that with the much bigger overhead, in addition to kind of scaling things back, but making it more dense with content and more rich within the open world and within the dungeons overall, I think they can create a Legend of Zelda game that is made in a good amount of time, 4 or 5 years. And if they've started development of the game after The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, because they did not do DLC for that game, I think they started working on the next one right away, and even kind of somewhat teased it a little bit. I do think that they can have a new Legend of Zelda game out in 2027 or 2028. That is my thought process, at least. So I do think that it's possible. Now, maybe not at this upcoming Nintendo Direct here, but I do think that it's possible for this year to get a tease of something. I think that you have a number of other announcements that they could do. Kid Icarus Uprising or Kid Icarus, that franchise has an anniversary as well. Pokemon, we know that the next new gen Pokemon game is coming. We're going to talk about that in just a bit too. The GameCube 25th anniversary, obviously, that's awesome too. You have games like Pikmin and other games that came out on the GameCube that have anniversaries. So there's a lot of good stuff that could happen. There's so many different good things. There's third-party franchises as well. Dragon Quest has a big anniversary too. So just like a lot of monumental stuff from the 80s definitely has its big 40th or whatever anniversary this year in 2026. So I expect lots of big announcements. I expect a lot of crazy moments. I expect this upcoming next Nintendo Direct to be very good. I think that Nintendo knows that they have to kind of shift that momentum heading into the early year after the holiday and initial sales hype. I think they have to kind of shift that into what people are expecting, which is why Furukawa said, hey, we do have games that are coming that people are expecting, the stuff that you know and love, the Mario, the Zelda, all that type of stuff. We have all that, but we also have new games as well. So I think that's what he's trying to do there. And I think that this Nintendo Direct is going to be a glimpse into what they're going to do, because remember, we usually have 3 Nintendo Directs in a year, and I don't expect that to be different this year. We usually have a early Nintendo Direct, so spring or February, March Nintendo Direct. Then we have a summer-ish type of Nintendo Direct, June, July, somewhere in that range. Then we have a fall Direct, which is almost always in September. And depending on the Direct, that's when we have certain games that are coming out. And sometimes these games will be announced and launched in the same year. Nintendo doesn't always do it to where it's like they announce a game, then it comes out 5 years later or 4 years later. Sometimes that's the case with certain games, but in the Nintendo Switch 1 era, for those that are new at least, or if you just didn't remember, a lot of times these games were announced and dropped a number of months later. We saw that a lot when it comes to big games. Super Mario Bros. Wonder, for example, was announced in the summer of 2023 and then launched right there in the fall of 2023. So it's something that's happened so many times, even with their biggest games. So I would definitely expect that heading into 2026 here, with some marquee titles that we can know more about at this upcoming Nintendo Direct and for the Nintendo Directs that are happening later in the year, because everything just doesn't get announced at one Direct. They have multiple Directs, so we'll see exactly how that works out. So what do you guys think about here when it comes to what could potentially be announced at the upcoming Nintendo Direct and the Switch 2 and its 2026 campaign? Let me know in the comment section below. But all right, we are going to move over to the next topic here. Shout out to my man Stealth. So the Pokemon Company president Ishihara spoke at the New York Video Game Award. He accepted the Andrew Yoon Legend Award on behalf of the current owners of Pokemon, Game Freak, Creatures, and Nintendo. So they all own Pokemon, which would have been a little bit of question amongst the fans, or like who owns the Pokemon brand overall, and it's owned by 3 of them: Game Freak, Creatures, and Nintendo all together. Now, and he also talked about producing the next game in the series. He didn't give us any type of real information on that, but the fact that he said it's happening, this next game is going down, and we kind of already knew this because of the leaks, but I do think that it's interesting to talk about what they could do for the next game overall, and I would say anticipation and pressure that it is to deliver on an IP as big as this. Listen, the Pokemon Company, they see all this stuff. Game Freak, Nintendo, they see all this stuff when it comes to what people are saying about Pokemon. They have a system with the Nintendo Switch 2 that is significantly more capable than whatever they've ever worked on in the history of Pokemon. When it comes to the Game Boy and the GBA and the DS and the Nintendo Switch 1, they have the Nintendo Switch 2 that is much better. I do think that it's time at this point. Now, based off of the leaks that we've gotten, it definitely seems that they're taking the art and the graphics and things like that a bit more seriously overall. Now, people have talked about budgets and things like that. I don't look at that type of stuff because that type of stuff is subject to change so much over the course of development and all of that. So that's irrelevant in my opinion, at least. What it really comes down to is the talent, is the passion, and the effort that is woven into the product overall. We saw that with Expedition 33, that you don't need $500 billion in order to make a game that people incredibly love and think that is super high quality and looks great from an artistic standpoint and all of that. So that's going to be one of the key things with this next Pokemon game coming up. They have a system that is completely capable of that. But just taking the next step when it comes to that and using a system like the Switch 2 in order to build an experience that's going to look, run, play, and be a lot better than maybe what some people are expecting overall. Now, I'm not expecting them to max out Switch 2 and for it to be a graphical type of beast or anything like that. I'm not expecting that at all, but I am expecting it to be up to the level of what we could see when it comes to artistically and designed some of the better or middle to high end Nintendo Switch 1 games. That's what I am expecting. Give us good resolution, give us good frame rate, and I think that that's okay. So we'll find out more about this next Pokemon game at Pokemon Day in February. They should be announcing it then. So what do you guys think overall when it comes to everything that we talked about here? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.